Thus, everything within the prophet is symbolic. It is a man engaging in a dialogue with himself at the end of his life, synthesizing all the experience he has gathered, isn't it? Here, he is about to share what he has learned about children, right? Children in the literal sense, those who are born from our own bodies, because the concept of children is very broad, as there are many ways to give birth. Do you realize that this concept of giving birth is very subjective? When I help someone awaken to a new level of consciousness, haven't I given birth to that person in a way? It is possible to give birth to the body, to the soul, and to the spirit. So here, he will speak more specifically about the matter of physical children. That is today's topic. Human beings, at least initially, understand giving birth primarily as a physical act. As one progresses, it becomes clear that there are other ways, and that the task of having children is not limited to giving birth to a body, because that alone would not truly be human. Your task does not end there, because even an animal can do that, bring forth a body. And the human being, with all the possibilities at their disposal, must bring forth more light than just this. And thus begins the true task of having children, forming human beings. And that is precisely what he sets out to discuss. It is complex, it is broad, it involves many things because, as I mentioned at the beginning, our society educates us to do things, not to build human beings. So we do not know how to do this. We do not know the basic parameters of life. We do not know how to shape even ourselves, let alone others. And sometimes we are not even aware that this is necessary. This is quite curious. Today I saw a candidate, whose name I won't mention to avoid controversy, who, at a certain point in these electoral debates happening everywhere, when someone said, but you engaged in corruption," he replied, "No, everyone is corrupt to begin with. That's why we need strict laws to always keep watch." But what a lack of faith in the human condition. Is everyone corrupt? Then let's give up on humanity. Let's just take up the whip. But it's not like that. This kind of doubt about human relationships causes people to lose all hope. It becomes a source of collective depression. But that's not true. The human condition is capable of so much more than that. Yet I find it curious when someone who shapes public opinion says this on the news of a major newspaper. At first glance, everyone is corrupt. So we must strengthen the laws to keep watch over them. Who can guarantee that those who make the laws aren't corrupt? And who watches over them? And who enforces the punishment? And what about everything else? So just give up because there's no solution. It will be like a domino effect. Everything will collapse, right? If we do not believe in the human condition and in the possibility of an inner vigilance born from our own conscience, then the human condition becomes truly sad, truly pathetic. Losing faith in humanity is one of the worst things that can happen to humankind. This was a bizarre thing that I cut it out and retained it. But then I decided, no, worse is to come. Certainly. Terrible, truly terrible, I thought. Well, but let us continue. So this is our need. And let us speak a little about this. The need to give birth, which is not limited to bringing physical bodies into the world. Let us seek to understand a bit more about this task. And a woman. Thus begins the dialogue, the conversation. And a woman who was holding a baby in her arms said, "Speak to us of children." So imagine, a woman is holding a baby in her arms. You might say, is she only going to comment on that? Yes, I am. I will comment only on that. It is interesting for us to reflect on this. When a woman carries a baby in her womb or holds a baby in her arms, it is very difficult for her consciousness not to identify that body as something that is hers, something that came into the world through her, but that does not belong to her. Because in truth, and we will reiterate this further on, not even our own body truly belongs to us. This mysterious being that lives within us, came into the world through this body. But can't this be taken away from us at any moment? Nothing that is truly yours can be taken from you. If it can be taken from you, it is because it was never truly yours. We need to understand that we came into the world through the body, but we are not the owners of these bodies. Otherwise, we generate attachment, fear, neediness, and despair. And this sense of possession we have regarding our own body, we transfer to the body of this child. as if the child were a continuation of ourselves. So imagine, for those who have already had children, you know that having a child is a great opportunity to develop a certain altruism, a spirit of sacrifice, a willingness to sacrifice oneself for another human being. But for this to happen, you must overcome the tendency to transfer your own selfishness from your body to another body, as if it were merely an extension of yourself. Do you understand this? Plato talks about this when he speaks of children in the Republic, where he says the following: "When we spoke about love, we discussed this at length, that true love cannot be a horizontal line. It cannot be a commercial relationship of exchange, a give and take. In other words, I give something and expect to receive something in return. True love is always vertical. I give simply out of the desire to see the beloved being moved toward what is good. Love fulfills itself. It does not expect anything in return." And he say that within society in general, on the everyday forms of love that we know, the one that most resembles this when it is healthy is the love that parents have for their children. Because as you can imagine, those of you who have children will remember this, the countless sleepless nights, the many times dealing with those childhood illnesses, those endless viruses, and we find ourselves pulling our hair out, not knowing what to do, the sheer amount of effort devoted to all of that. What did we expect from this, if not the health and well-being of that being? If you expect nothing in return, you want only is for this being to fulfill themselves, to be healthy, good, just, a person of integrity. This is truly admirable because there is no expectation of reciprocation. So it already fits within this vertical sentiment. However, sometimes even this can lose its true character when it is tainted by selfishness. And then you are left with that feeling when this child grows up and becomes a young person. I did so much for you, and look at how you repay me. So it turned into a kind of private pension plan, didn't it? I invest, and they are supposed to give something back to me. So you have made this sentiment horizontal, and that impoverishes it. Imagine if you started to keep track in the night of every hour you woke up to care for your child, just to charge them for it in the future. Overtime with a hazard pay bonus because the child was still sick. This is madness. But we end up with some bizarre situations when we are tainted by selfishness. In other words, instead of using this relationship as an opportunity to develop altruism, sometimes we simply transfer the selfishness from our own body to another body. Great, I used to have just one, now I have two. Both of them are mine, and other children don't matter. What matters is this: who is mine? Have you ever noticed how this feeling becomes limited? The neighbor's child? Have you ever seen how annoying that girl is? So ugly. Now mine is the most special child in the world. Why? Because she organically has something different from another child? No, because it came out of the most special womb in the universe, which is mine. Okay, so it is a transfer of my selfishness that limits this feeling. So when we don't have this relationship with our own body, of knowing that we have an essence within the body, which came into the world through this, we create all of this. We will have this same sense of possession regarding our children's bodies, which then generates all sorts of neediness, dependency, and demands. Have you ever heard of something called empty nest syndrome? It's when a parent has spent their whole life thinking this way. And one fine day, which is a natural process, the children grow up and follow their own path. They fall into depression because they believed that was something of theirs, and suddenly life took it away. They feel in a certain way wronged, and sometimes they demand, and sometimes they present the bill. This is a source of endless unhappiness. It is natural. It is in the principles of the relationship that one day they will follow their own path. And you cannot expect anything in return. You should not. It is natural for this feeling to be one way. So selfishness generates more selfishness and will create a series of conflicts within this relationship. Right? And the prophet said, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself." Imagine how interesting that is. What is life's longing for itself? The essence of life desires to perpetuate itself. Life seeks perpetuation. And as we mentioned at the beginning, there are different levels of life. Life vibrates in our thoughts. Life vibrates in our emotions. And life vibrates in our bodies. Now, it happens that within the material plane, there is only one way for life to perpetuate itself to reach eternity. Is there anything eternal in the material plane? Do you know of anything, any eternal body? There is only one way, which is to place new bodies in the place of the old ones, which is what spring does. We say, well, spring is renewal. Yes, but with different flowers. They are not the same as those from the previous spring. The only form of eternity in matter is to place new bodies in the place of the old ones. For the material plane, this is the only thing that can be done. But if a person limits themselves to the material plane, they will feel frustrated. Because this continuity is not the continuity of the same being, but of another similar being. It is not the same one. They cannot feel ownership over the flower of the next spring. It no longer belongs to them. It is another life. Do you understand this? And if one does not find this perpetuation in subtler planes, if remains only on the material plane, one will feel deeply frustrated when they sense this new life slipping from their hands and moving toward its own destiny. On the material plane, there is only one form of eternity, which is substitution, renewal. A new body in place of the old one. Human consciousness seeks individuality. It seeks to perpetuate itself as itself. Therefore, we must seek this eternity on subtler planes, because otherwise we will feel as if we own our children. There is no other way. It is my way of becoming eternal. I only have this world. Right? So this need for perpetuation must find something where we can perpetuate our individuality, our very selves. An immortal essence within us, which perpetuates itself and not by placing new bodies in the place of the old ones. In other words, some degree of spirituality. We will talk more about this later on. It is very difficult to escape possessiveness if you do not develop some degree of spirituality, because where else would you turn? What would you suggest to a parent suffering from empty nest syndrome? What should they fill that nest with? If he has nothing else, what is he supposed to do? When life puts pressure on us, the way out is not to either side. It is upwards. Do you understand? If we kept this simple Eastern maxim in mind, we would avoid much suffering. When life presses us from all sides, the way out is upwards. There is no use trying to break through the walls and escape through them. Sometimes it leaves no opening, not because it conspires against you, but because it dreams of you on another level. They come through you, but not from you, and though they are with you, they do not belong to you. As I was telling you just a moment ago, the very immortal essence of the human being comes through the body, and if I have no contact with this essence, my identity is with the body. And it is a curious thing because the more we identify with the body, instead of using it well, we misuse it. Have you ever noticed how curious that is? Let me explain. Lao Tzu, you may have heard of a Chinese sage named Lao Tzu, left us a book called the Tao Te Ching. A truly beautiful book, by the way. It is one of my bedside books. I won't even get into this whole story about bedside books. Otherwise, soon you'll say I'm hosting a TV dinner. An encyclopedia by the bedside, but it would actually be a very good thing. So this Tao Te Ching, it often talks about how the sages of the past used to be. This is a real treasure. I find it very interesting for us to imagine what a sage is like, because don't we all want to love wisdom? To love wisdom, you have to be able to see it. It has to be something tangible for you. And in one of these passages from the Tao Te Ching, it says the following. It expresses itself more or less like this. The sages of old behaved as if they were guests of a very ceremonious host. Can you imagine that? If you are not like this, remember the maxim that says nothing that truly belongs to you can ever be taken from you. If this here can be taken from me, and in fact it can at any moment, then it is not mine. It belongs to nature, and I will return to her one day. So if this is not mine, if it belongs to nature, what I am in relation to this here? A guest. And this guest, I am a guest of a very ceremonious host, or perhaps not. Observe how nature arranges its home. Look at the plants outside. Look at the flowers of our spring that is just beginning. See how life organizes, how it brings harmony to things. Nature is very ceremonious, very meticulous, very attentive to detail, isn't it? And we are guests within her home. And when you are a guest in the home of someone who is very attentive to detail, very refined, don't you try to behave appropriately so that this host will want to welcome you back into their home, right? To respect that room which they lent you and gave you shelter in. Do you realize that by identifying ourselves with the body, instead of respecting it, we end up profaning it? We show no consideration for it. We deform it so that it fits into fashion trends. Many times we worship the body in ways that weaken it more than strengthen it. Ultimately, by identifying with the body, humans do not actually bring any advantages to it. In general, it does harm. Take notice of this. What do you think about this? A person who is completely ignorant and identifies with the body, and a wise person who does not identify with the body, which of their bodies is better cared for? In general, it is the wise person's body, for he gives to that body only what is just and appropriate for it. He treats it properly. The one who identifies with the body ends up spoiling it. And generally, the body does not benefit from this, all right? It is treated inappropriately, placed in a bubble where it becomes weakened. In short, this generates a host of whims and weaknesses that it should not have, a multitude of dependencies that it should not possess. And then all sorts of imbalances arise. So notice something very interesting that Plato discusses. If you ever have the curiosity to read a dialogue called The Laws, where he talks about education, and what we are discussing here is the education of children, right? He says that education has a lot to do with a concept that we hardly understand at all, which is representativity. We talk a lot about this concept in politics, especially during election periods like now. Politicians represent us. In reality, this is just another word that has been emptied of meaning like so many others, right? Can I represent Solo right now, here in this lecture? No, he is present. Isn't that so? So who can I represent? Someone who is absent. Isn't that so? So imagine you have a child whose education is your responsibility. This child gradually develops consciousness. We know this. In fact, Eastern tradition says that this happens in cycles of 7 years. Up to the age of 7, the child is developing the physical body, learning to manage it, walking, sitting, crawling, all those things. From 7 to 14 years old, the child begins to deal with their own energy. So it's a phase where just watching them makes you tired. From 14 to 21, they are dealing with emotions. And at 21, the process of updating the mind begins. That is why in Rome, in the Corpus Juris Civilis, they set 21 years as the age of majority. Have you never wondered about that? Why 21? It's an odd number, isn't it? Why not 20? Because it is the third 7-year cycle of life. So it is said that this mental process is updated with what Plato called reminiscences. That is the old age of the soul. Everything that being has already accumulated in experience is updated at this point. But before this update happens, and of course this is an average, it won't be the same for every human being, but it's roughly around this age. Before this update takes place, doesn't the person need to be formed first? Doesn't he need to be formed by spiritual principles that must be updated through the mind? If his mind has not yet reached the moment to be fully updated, then someone must step in to represent those principles that are absent. Isn't that so? So imagine a being in the process of formation, developing from the ground up the physical body, the energetic body, the emotional body, this key, because the mind is a bridge to the spiritual. If that mind has not yet arrived, then someone else's must step in, because if not, this body will form anyway, full of vices, full of weaknesses. Do you understand? So you step in to represent what is absent in that child. You will guide the formation of this personality as their own spiritual self would, if it were present. Because then, when that self arrives, you hand over the house to them, well formed. Now, the crucial question, can you represent something that is also absent within yourself? If you have no spiritual life, how can you represent that to others? How can you represent something you yourself do not possess? This is where Plato concludes in a way I find beautiful, that the condition of the educator is connected to virtue, to the contact of consciousness with being, to spirituality. Could you imagine selecting educators in this way? A newspaper ad, seeking virtuous educators. Because if a person needs information out of love for their craft, they acquire it quickly. But is it possible to enroll someone in a course on justice, fraternity, or spirituality? If they do not have it, it is difficult. And this is the fundamental condition of the educator. The educator in society is the one who educates their own child, right? So they are with us, but they do not belong to us. And we receive a mission, which is what is commonly called dharma. The dharma of an educator, whether a parent or not, is to represent the spiritual principle and to shape that personality in accordance with spiritual principles. And for this, it is essential that these principles are present within the educator. Hence that famous phrase from Plato, which says that the best thing we can do for those we love is to grow as human beings. The best thing? Only in this way can we guarantee anything for them. Do you understand this? This is the foundation of education. Consider that today no one talks about this. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. This is something very interesting. You can see that this little bear who wants to go onto the highway doesn't have thoughts very similar to those of the mother bear, right? She is having quite a bit of work trying to convince him. This is very interesting because we are a mystery. In general, we do not have that much self-knowledge. Throughout life, when we do, we try to get to know ourselves. This being that comes into the world through us is a mystery. You also do not know who is behind this body. And in general, what do we dream of? There is even a song by Chico Buarque that every mother, every father dreams of a grand being. We hope that a great idealist will come, someone who will change the course of humanity, but I do not know that being who came through me is a mystery. What I hope for and what I must hope for is that at the very least, they become a good person. Isn't that it? Just fraternal, kind. If they are to have a family, may they be a good parent at the very least. May they be a person of integrity. Do you realize that for this, I must provide them with a reference of goodness? I need to embody. That's where the old maxim comes in, that true teaching is given through example. I must embody this idea of goodness so that they may at least become a person of integrity. Because if I do not explain to them what goodness is, how can I expect them to seek it? And this matter of example is something it is very important to understand. Epictetus, an ancient philosopher, said that the seeds of greatness in a person require an image. In order to germinate and flourish, there must be an external, concrete reference. It is inherent to the psyche of a child, a pre-adolescent, or an adolescent. To need heroes, do you notice that? To need role models, someone who inspires them, who urges them to become greater, to overcome their limits. When they do not find this example in their father, their mother, or in the person entrusted with their education, unconsciously, they will seek it elsewhere. Someone who goes beyond social boundaries, someone who is a bit more daring, someone who is daring. And since they do not have a strong reference for what kind of boldness is appropriate, sometimes they will look for someone who simply breaks the inertia, who is very bold, who is very daring. How often do they end up in the hands of, of a drug dealer, of a delinquent? Because sometimes the parents are too complacent and do not provide guidance. They do not nurture their children's dreams. So the children go after those who at the very least are bold. They challenge mediocrity. They go beyond. How many times have you heard the story of parents who lament and suffer? And this is a very legitimate concern. How do I protect my son or daughter from falling under this influence in society? There is a very ancient philosophical formula, which is to make your child admire you. To make your child see you as a small hero, someone who is always striving to grow as a human being. If your child admires you, your voice will have 10 times more weight than any other voice in society. Do you understand this? This is a formula that has always been recommended. Make your child to see you as a small hero, admire you, because then what you say will carry weight. Run and give them the opportunity to pursue their own path. Give your best to yourself for life, for your human condition, because this, as Plato used to say, is the best thing you can do for them to grow. This will give them a reference. References that society does not provide. One thing that is extremely important, which today parents have forgotten they must do to educate, to set an example, is to guide the child. Within the laws of nature, which are inexorable, the child must understand them and learn to obey them in the most intelligent way. The law of cause and effect. There is no way around. You cannot protect your child from the law of cause and effect for their entire life, which is what is often called the law of karma. Do you notice what sometimes happens with parents? Sometimes they had a childhood or adolescence where they went through certain adversities, faced certain limitations, and what do they want? Their child to have no limitations, have everything. So what idea does this plant in the child's mind? The notion that without creating any cause, they will have the right to all the effects. Isn't that so? And then at a certain point, there is no longer that father or mother to pamper them. Society will give them anything if they do not create causes. No. How many times do you see these spoiled young people throwing themselves into the abyss? Because there is no one left to pamper them. They believe that society has the obligation to continue what the parents did. They have created an artificial relationship that does not exist anywhere. This relationship of cause and effect is formed in the child's mind from the moment he understands that if he puts his toys away in the toy chest, he has the right to play at the same time tomorrow. If he makes his bed, he earns the right to watch television. This relationship of cause and effect is to frame him within the laws of life so that he learns to obey them intelligently and to extract the most from them. Amir Klink, when he writes that book, have you ever heard of Amir Klink? He took a little boat and crossed the Atlantic Ocean. With a little boat, 100 days between sky and sea. This book is truly fascinating. He says the following, that one of the people he was most grateful to was his father, because his father knew how to set boundaries for him, and by setting boundaries, he taught him the importance of limits, and he taught him to deal intelligently with these limits in order to overcome them. Because those who accomplish great things are not madmen. He knows how to deal intelligently with their own limits to surpass them. And not teaching this law of nature produces young people, sometimes suicidal, who demand from life something that it will not give. And they end up throwing themselves into abysses, you see, with no compensation, with no way back. It is complicated to go back and re-educate a young person like that, you see? What else? Another very important element. At a certain point in adolescence, in youth, even if they do not express it in words, sometimes they do, but sometimes not. Sometimes even in silence, every young person places themselves before their parents, before their educators, and asks, what is the best thing in life? And this answer is fundamental, because depending on how you respond, they will chase after it with all their might, because this is the age of adventure. This is appropriate. This is the moment. It is the heroic dream and the quest to surpass limits. It is the age of adventure. If you say, this is the best thing, they will chase it with might, even if you do not say it explicitly, but rather through the way you live. So a society that is entirely accommodated, entirely conformist. What is the best thing in life for today's society? What is the ultimate goal? Pleasure. Do you see? People chase after having a good job, a good salary, a nice house. In the end, what do you want to turn all of this into? Comfort. A society that loves comfort much more than growth, that is pleasure. I even joked with you in the last lecture we had here in Sobradinho that I said that the greetings we use reveal a lot about this, about our values. In Rome, when you met someone, you would say Av to the sacred. Among the Arabs, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, Namaste. Among the Hindus, to the divine. I mentioned to you that the Incas would say, do not be a liar, do not be a thief, do not be lazi. Remember that? Can you imagine a person repeating this over 10 times 20? When they are 2, think about lying, they'll get an electric shock. It's a form of self-discipline. Through repetition, when you are introduced to someone new in our current society, what do you say? Nice to meet you. In other words, what I have that is best, the very essence of life I wish for you. Notice that when you say this, let's say to a young person, through their life choices, they will say, oh, pleasure, leave it to me. Then I want all the pleasure and fast, because this is typical of that anxiety, of that spirit of not waiting and wanting everything at once, which is normal of this age. I want all the pleasure, and now. Where will someone end up with this kind of choice? Drugs, promiscuity, reckless speed, and all those things that often throw life away for nothing. Do you remember a little song by young people that said the following? That it's better to live 10 years at 1,000 than 1,000 years at 10? If all you have to offer me is pleasure, leave it to me. Because you will live 70, 80 years and only have pleasure. I will live 10 and have all the pleasure at once. Because who can deny a drug brings pleasure, except it destroys your life in 10? Well, you will end up with yours in 70. But you will have it in homeopathic doses, I will have it in doses allopathic, all at once, but if you have nothing else. You offer nothing, they aren't foolish. How will you take him out of there? Do you realize you have no currency for exchange? How will you take him out of there? Once again, the fact that we have not achieved values leaves us with empty hands before those we love so much. We want to give so much and have so little. Do you remember Javan's song? Do you know what it is to not have and yet have to give? If you haven't achieved values at this moment, it is a very painful thing. The most you have to give in the highest dose can be fatal, right? And a very poor sense of life to pass on to our youth. So these are just a few reflections we can make. Well, they are at a level of consciousness. I don't know who this person is, who came through me. He has his own thoughts, and I have to try to guide him to the next step. Maybe he won't be the greatest idealist, but a good man every parent wants for their children. But for that, I have to embody what is good. How can I pull him in this direction? And to represent what is good is something very demanding. It requires a lot from you. You have to lead by example, otherwise it won't work, right? And young people, they're not really into empty talk. They feel more than they listen. And if you don't have nothing to offer, they will notice that. And they will seek out someone who does, which is often a mistake. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. This is a source of anguish for parents, because we are very materialistic. We want to see the fruit of all our efforts. The most we can do for our children is to plant the seeds. Perhaps we may never see them bear fruit, but for that, we must have them. Remember those Egyptian workers? I find this very interesting, because for society today, this would seem like madness. Can you imagine a pyramid like those at Giza, where sometimes 8 or 9 generations worked on it? You know that those who worked in the 2nd or 3rd generation building it, they knew for sure that they would not see it finished. Do you believe they worked with less love because of that? Because they would not see the result? There was not such attachment to the product itself, but rather to giving your best in that moment. This desire to take possession of the product, this selfishness of wanting to see results prematurely, sometimes leads to interference in our children's lives that is not healthy. Knowing how to respect the pace at which the seeds will mature within them, perhaps we will see them bloom. But I am aware that I have planted there the best seeds possible. Do you remember that popular saying that tells us we must know how to separate the wheat from the chaff? To separate the good grain, the good seed, it requires discernment, so that I know how to choose within myself, within my own life, the good seed, so that I have something to give. There is a certain passage in which Professor Jorge Angel Livraga, who is the founder of New Acropolis, says the following: "Let no one be able to say of you, I passed by them and they gave me nothing." In other words, let us strive to cultivate good seeds to offer to all those children, not only the physical ones. Ideally, we should be in a constant state of generosity. But for that, always diving within ourselves and go deep seeking out the good seed. Do you remember that very beautiful song? These days, I'm becoming a bit old-fashioned. Sometimes I mention songs that no one knows, but I think you know this one. It goes, "I want a house in the country where I can stay, the size of peace." I find that interesting, that song. It speaks of these cycles of life where you retreat into this house in the country, which is your essence, and you engage in deep reflection, choosing the good grain. And when friends come, when your children arrive, you have something to offer. You are not empty-handed. What can you offer to someone if you have not gone through a stage of diving within and choosing the good grain and having the patience to let it germinate? And at its own pace and not at the other's pace that your anxiety dictates. Without an inner life, there is not much we can share with those around us. Notice how demanding it is to raise human beings. One of the things I find curious in our society, which you must have already noticed, when you talk, for example, about an adoption, the laws are many and generally strict. But to have a child, nothing. You just need to be fertile. Isn't that so? Sure. Children are kids of humanity. We should take responsibility for these children brought into the world without any level or condition. They are our children as well. To have a child, a human being, is something that demands a lot. It requires us to be truly human, and this is something that is often overlooked, especially in our times. You may strive to be like them, but do not try to make them like you, for life does not go backward, nor does it remain in yesterday. Understand this, for it is very curious and interesting. Every person who is superficial clings to forms because he only has the form, not the substance. If I have substance, no matter what form appears, I know how to adapt it. For example, let me give you a very practical example. Suppose you know what philosophy is. I often use this example with my students. Then a 5-year-old child comes up to you and says, Hey, what is philosophy? But you only know that memorized concept from Plato. Justice, for example, which is a well-known concept from Plato. The 5-year-old child comes up licking a lollipop and asks you, "What is justice, uncle?" But you only know the memorized concept from Plato, which is to give each one what is due, what corresponds to them by nature and actions. Do you think a 5-year-old will understand that? They'll just keep licking their lollipop. Give what, uncle? Then an elderly person comes, then someone humble, then an intellectual comes along. Do you realize that if you only have the shell, the form, the memorized concept, you won't be able to explain this to all these people? You need to dive within yourself to understand what this concept truly is, grasp the heart of this concept, and then you adapt it for a 5-year-old child. Adapt it for an elder, adapt it for a simple person, adapt it for the intellectual. Why? Because I have the heart, and I wrap it in a form that suits the listener, since the form will always change. Now, when a person does not have deep principles, the result of reflection and an inner life, and only has a single form, a mechanical way that he has acquired, he tries to impose this form on his children. They will not accept it, because that form is outdated. It's out of fashion. It belongs to another time. The material world is dynamic. It is always making new equations, new circumstances of time and space. And this essence that you possess will have to adapt to a new era. One thing is to let circumstances deform you. Another thing is the necessity that you have to adapt the same idea to the conditions of the terrain. Imagine that you have a very good car, Karina, with an excellent engine. You imagined it, right? Everyone can imagine. If you drive on a paved road, a wonderful one, you have a certain speed, X. If you drive on a bumpy road, you have a different speed, Y. You adapt according to the conditions of the terrain, but the engine is always good. You are not going to go speeding wild on a bumpy road. That makes no sense. The engine is good, but you drive according to the conditions of the road. Isn't that right? The form will not be identical. No, my car is good. I only drive above 80. That is foolishness. It is clearly stated. It is clearly stated in the conditions of any vehicle that you have the wisdom to adapt it to the conditions of the road. And so if I have a good engine, a good essence, an inner life, depth, well, I know how to adapt that to the language of my child, to the needs of these circumstances, which are different. Otherwise, I am a formalist, that rigid person who cannot question that form, because they only have the form. So I cannot question that memorized concept of Plato because I don't know what it really is. I only know the memorized. If you take that away from me, I'm lost. I remember once we have a teacher in Brasilia, whom some of you know, Professor José Enrique, who is quite a unique and peculiar person, extremely simple person and has a very simple, sometimes humorous way of expressing things. And once I saw him completely disarm an intellectual with just 2 or 3 words, it was quite amusing. The person went on and on saying, because such and such philosopher said this, another philosopher said that, and he let the person finish calmly with that peculiar manner of his where he just stands there like this. Then he turned to the person and said, "All right, but in practice, what did you actually understand from all that?" "I don't know." There was nothing practical, no depth, no essence. It was just rote memorization. What else could he say? Repeat everything all over again? He had already said everything he knew. It was just a facade. In practice, there was nothing profound. So if you don't have the essence of what you believe in, if you only have the form, you won't transmit it. Superficiality isn't pedagogical. Depth is pedagogical. It convinces through example. It is able to respond to any circumstance, to navigate any road. Do you understand this? Once again, it's the same story, isn't it? One must be. This is pedagogical. To be is pedagogical. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might so that his arrows may go far and swift. In other words, the great archer, who is God, uses us as instruments to launch his arrows, which are his will, toward their destiny, one of the most symbolic elements. In the history of universal mythology is the bow and arrow. Great heroes, all of them use the bow and arrow. It is Ulysses in Greece, Arjuna in India, even Buddha himself in the story of Buddhism. Very common. Rama in the Ramayana, all the great heroes use the bow and arrow because it is a symbol of that being who is so flexible that he bends to the divine will, to the Dharma, to the great law. He possesses this flexibility to adapt to the divine will, to what it requires of him at each moment in such a way that through him, the divine can reach its goal. In other words, he is not rigid, he is not formal, he is profound. The will, he understands the needs of life. One day we are arrows, and we ourselves go forth to fulfill the divine will. One day we are bows. In other words, we launch other beings so that they may reach and fulfill this divine will. One day we will even identify with this and with the great archer himself, for one day we will find God within us and become one with him. Do you see that this is what human evolution is about? One day I will go there and act. I am a young person full of fire, full of energy. Another day I must be able to shape those who will go forth and act. And on another day I will be part of the one who launches the arrows into the world. I will find God within myself. This is the natural journey of beings, and to accept what life demands of us at each moment and know how to do it, to prepare oneself for this, to be able to fulfill what nature expects of us at every moment, knowing where you want to go. And finally, as I mentioned to you, this chapter is quite short. Let the archer bend you with joy, for just as he loves the arrow that flies, he also loves the bow that is steady. This is interesting. There is a passage in that classic I mentioned to you, the Ramayana, which is a classic Indian epic. A very beautiful Indian story, which has a certain being there who was like a wild man and spoke the language of nature. He understood the language of animals, of plants. He communicated with nature. And one day he was telling that he spoke with the sea. And the sea told him that there was something it had never seen the rivers bring to it, were those shrubs that were flexible and capable of dancing with the winds and storms. And because they were flexible, the winds and storms were not able to uproot them, throw them into the rivers, and carry them to the sea. Everything that was rigid, the sea had already seen, because it was uprooted and carried by the rivers to the sea. What was intelligently flexible didn't lose its foundations, its principles, but it was able to obey the circumstances, to adapt its roots, its principles to the direction of the wind. This one had never been carried to the ocean, and the ocean did not know it. Let me give you a more practical example so you can grasp it. There was a time when it was very trendy. Today, no one remembers it anymore. A writer named Carlos Castaneda, whose story is quite interesting. A true story. As far as I know, he has already passed away, but his story is basically interesting. It's nothing exceptional, but it is interesting. He was an American student, and like many American students, he was a bit vain, a bit full of himself, an academic, right? And he goes to Central America to conduct field research with the indigenous people living there. It was a field study by an American anthropologist with poor indigenous folks, because that was his mindset, right? Primitives. And so he arrives there and meets an indigenous man named Don Juan, who was the heir to some very profound pre-Columbian traditions, which were the Olmecs. Sorry, not Olmecs, but Toltecs. He was the heir of a Toltec shaman and possessed an extraordinary, profound knowledge. He wasn't even literate. Profound, not extensive. But Don Juan was an exceptional man, an elder, very, very wise regarding the knowledge of the laws of nature. And then imagine the young American looks at him and says, "Poor thing." And he looks at the young man and says, "Poor thing." What a coincidence, right? But you see, since he was a young man whom he noticed had certain qualities, some potential, he comes up to him and says, "Come here, my son. You don't know anything, but I liked you. If you want to stay here with me." It was a hut, okay? "If you want to stay here with me for a few years, helping me, serving me here, I'll teach you something. You'll leave here knowing a little, because right now you are completely ignorant." I haven't seen something like that. And incredibly, Castaneda, with all his pride, accepts and stays there living with the indigenous man. It's something impressive, because he says, "My life began there." Well, anyway, he stays there for a few years, learns a lot of things. It's an interesting experience that he recounts in his work. Then one day he returns to the United States, of course, returns to his life. Then Don Juan, I don't know how he communicates with him, writes or asks someone to write, to say that he had to resolve a legal issue, which I no longer remember exactly what it was about. In other words, that he had to go to the United States, Chicago. And then Carlos Castaneda thinks, oh my, me walking around with that Indian in the middle of the street, in the middle of the city of Chicago, this is going to be strange. Well, it is a wonderful person. Then he went to the airport to meet the Indian. Suddenly, someone taps him on the shoulder, a man with slicked back hair, in a suit and tie, extremely elegant. It was Don Juan. He almost fell over backwards, right? He said, "But what are you doing like this?" He replied, "Do you think I am those clothes I wear, that I identify myself with them? They are simply a form suited to that context. I came here with that form only if I wanted to create folklore, draw attention, put on a show. I came here with a good and clear goal, and I will use the form that is most appropriate. Good for this purpose. I am not the form. I keep them. I am intelligently. I am not the form. Imagine that. Once again, he learned a lot from Don Juan. I'm not this. I am not those clothes, nor these. Now, in this context, if I need to use this one, I use this one. My principles remain the same. I am the same. I found this experience very interesting. It demonstrates in a much clearer way what is being conveyed to us, doesn't it? So, let the archer bend you, shape you with joy. Let us be moldable and flexible in the hands of this great archer, so that the law of life may be fulfilled through us, without giving up our essence, but the form adapts to each context and to each moment, right? Without rigidity. As we have already discussed, it is a symptom of superficiality. For just as he loves the arrow that flies, he also loves the bow that is stable. Stable with the proper flexibility, but stable in the sense that it remains in the same place. Notice what we were saying. One day we were the arrow that flies, or we are, because many of you still have time. Time is an arrow ahead of you, right? One day we will be the bow, one day we will be one with the archer himself. Notice that if you look to the Egyptian tradition, the graphic representation of this idea of the bow and arrow is very similar. They speak of something called Tao, not Tao with an O, Tao, T-A-U, Tao, which was the representation of man, of the wise man. They say that you evolve vertically, upwards, seeking the human essence. At a certain moment, when you find this human essence, you stabilize. You become a balanced man, stable, noble, sober, as close as possible to the wise man. When we find this stability, one day we will encounter eternity, which is a sphere that sits up here. Then you have the line of ascension, stability, and thus a sphere. You may have already seen this. It is known as the Ankh key, the key of life. It is the path of human evolution. So we are the arrow, one day the bow, and one day the archer himself, eternity, and to know how to fulfill the role that we correspond in each moment, to prepare for what life will require from us. Because what did we come to do in life if not to serve it? And what are we doing if not preparing to serve life? And you realize that we rush from one place to another, always running, doing what if not this? What could be nobler than this? In other words, the key to educating is to be. There is nothing better. No more we can do for those we love than to grow as human beings. This is the foundation. It's almost intuitive. You notice that when we speak, or even when wise people say this, we bring it up and say, I already knew that. It's so obvious, almost unquestionable, because it's so clear, isn't it? That's why it's said that true wisdom is not knowledge. It is recognition. It's as if you remember something that in a certain way you have always known. You recognize something that was dormant within you. To educate is to educe, to awaken, to bring forth. It is to make you remember something that already existed, lying dormant inside you.